Hello again, folks. I'm here now with Lauren's brother, Matthew Higdon. He's one of the yoga teachers here at Centered. And how long have you been practicing yoga, Matthew?
Pretty much daily for 10 years.
Okay, your average practice time, how long would you say a day? Average.
These days it's probably about 45 minutes, but sometimes it gets up to 2-3 hours.
Okay. What do you think the appeal? This is a world religions class, so we're looking at Hinduism and the spiritual traditions of India. India's a long way away. These practices, some of them anyway, are very ancient. Why do you think they ended up here in America, and why are they so popular today amongst stressed out Americans?
Well, I think that yoga as it was in India and as it some places persists is nothing like what we do here in America. To me, the yoga has more to do with what's going on in the mind, and the Western idea of yoga is very physically oriented.
Right.
So you can do calisthenics and look a lot like you're doing yoga. But I think the thing that brings the two worlds together, or that is the difference, the good difference between modern yoga and the way that we look at it and the ancient way of looking at it, one of the constants is breath. And so the idea that the breath is what sort of drives the experience, and then also the idea that the senses are involved, and that somehow by focusing the breath, by focusing the mind, by moving the body, the senses become sort of enveloped in this sort of special scenario where they can not be in the ordinary mundane sense reacting to external stimuli, but perhaps even reaching out to it, or pulling in from the senses a richer kind of quality.
So I noticed that you don't like to teach with mirrors in your yoga studio, and I take it because there's a culture where we're more concerned with what we look like in the posture, and really the emphasis is on what you're feeling when you're doing the posture. So take us on that journey a little bit. What kind of things do you feel? How does your awareness change when you're on the yoga mat doing your yoga practice?
Well, I think that, mirrors can be helpful, especially when you're learning form. But as far as doing yoga is concerned, it always needs to be an internal feeling sense of what's going on. And so the feeling sense of perhaps, the line from your hand back into your core and out through one of the legs per se, or if the arm is up or out to the side or behind you, can it connect meaningfully to your core? And a lot of people think about yoga as just a sort of a stretching thing.
Right.
And maybe in that sense they would stretch and they would try to find a sensation. But ultimately I feel like the real experience that we're after is not a stretching beyond or trying to conform or deform your body to create some sort of idealistic shape, but that by using your consciousness to penetrate more deeper layers of the body and to experience this angle or this line, and am I actually clear in that line or not, could be validated with a mirror or by videoing your practice or something like that. But I think that if we want to do yoga, it's not going to be able to be recorded. It's not going to be able to be seen in a mirror. It's not going to be validated by Instagram or Facebook or anything like that. It's something that is deeply personal and unique to the individual. And so we can go to many, many yoga classes, but never practice yoga, because if you're going to a class, it's very likely that you'll be listening to what the person is telling you. External focus. You'll be perhaps looking around, getting distracted by other people at some point or another, external focus. And you may relate some of the cues and some of the movements back to your inner feeling sense. But I think the real practice comes when you practice and learn the form, perhaps with a mirror or with a teacher or whatever. But then you go in later on by yourself in seclusion and you do the things in a way that is sort of almost spontaneous to your own experience. And then when you start to follow that spontaneous impulse, that's when we can really experience the depth of the practice, that is not there in like what I would say is modern yoga. And even in the sense of Indian yoga, it, because of the Western influence, has even to this day over in India been more physically focused. And so there's nothing wrong with doing the physical practice of yoga. I love doing it. As many poses as I can do, I like doing it. But at the same time, yoga in its essence is about relationship. And so it's not about what we do, but it's about the way that we relate and how we can acclimatize to a new relationship and how we can acclimate ourselves to this position or that position, not just physically, but mentally, intellectually, socially. Our standing and the way that we poise ourselves has an effect on our, and if you want to use Sanskrit words, karma. And so what we do internally, what we do externally, how we meet ourselves internally, whether we exercise in a sort of aggressive way where we're going to kick ass, or we exercise in a loving way where we are massaging ourselves, or we exercise in a disciplined way where we're very still and monk-like. Each way that we would interact with ourselves has an effect on how we interact with others. And so healing the relationship internally, making it varied and subtle and with layers and textures, helps us to reach out to others, which is inevitably what we have to do to survive, because no person obviously is an island, and we're all, interrelated and interdependent.
So, if I heard you rightly, then the practice of taking these different postures in the body, some of them which are difficult, some of them which involve a little bit of pain every now and then, but that how you practice meeting those different postures is practice for how you live your life. By learning to be present and mindful on the mat, you're learning how to be present and mindful with the various situations that come up in your life.
Right, and when you're choosing and doing the practice on your own, you can choose to encounter a certain amount of resistance inside, and you can back away from a certain amount of edge, or you can pursue it. And I think that what's really significant is not that we go into a pose that causes us pain, but that we learn to navigate when our psychological boundary is triggered. So if you hold, say, a Warrior 2 pose for 30 seconds with semi-decent form, it might be a certain level of challenge. If you hold it for several minutes without, while still trying to keep all the form and the breathing in place, it's going to be a big psychological boundary. At some point you hit and your body feels like, oh, I don't know if I can hold on, and the mind says, oh no, I definitely can't do this any longer. And then somehow magically, if you're very calm and you kind of have this vagus nerve activation from slow deep breathing, then you train your body and your mind too to realize that long after when the psychological boundary comes up, can I continue to breathe? Can I continue to remain here without being injured? And once I have a track record of experience with that, then little by little I develop, in a sense, a sort of organic faith. And a faith in that my mind might sometimes freak out and say this is not doable, or this is a circumstance where I need to freak out, or I need to react, or I can't handle. But in reality, when we breathe deeply, when we poise ourselves in a sort of disciplined way, then little by little we can become sort of stable, where there wasn't a faith, there can be a sort of a faith that, yes, one, this too shall pass kind of idea, where suffering is sort of temporal, but two, that we encounter a psychological boundary, and far sooner do we hit that boundary than our actual capabilities. And so learning that physically, learning that emotionally, learning that mentally, learning that intellectually, I think is really the boundary between being complacent and learning and expanding to a new paradigm.
So something about the practice is learning how to not shortchange yourself.
Right.
Yeah, learning not to accept less out of life than maybe you're capable of, but also what life can be, how deep the experience of life can be, how meaningful the experience of life can be.
Sure. Meeting yourself fully requires a level of attention. And so if you're not willing to spend the attention on yourself and you need to focus on external things or you want to be entertained, then you won't really experience that same sort of faith or that same sort of depth of experiencing that you would if you were more interested in what does it really mean to feel myself? What does it really mean to feel the relationship between me and this internal part or this external scenario? And, not everyone wants to ask super deep questions, but at the same time, I feel like everybody wants a higher quality of life. Everybody wants to know, what can I do to add more joy and less, encounter less suffering? And so in that regard, yes, when you do personal self-inquiry and when you focus inwards, you do learn about how weak you are in certain places and where the wiggly, embarrassed parts are and where we feel, insecure. But in that sort of learning about our insecurities, learning about our deeper unmet desires, we sort of get a chance to make something happen about it rather than allow life to happen to us. We get to grab the reins a bit with yoga and clean up those relationships rather than let them come to us the way that they would otherwise.
I mean, I was talking to this with Lauren. Yoga has this sense of wholeness, and she brought up this idea of kind of encountering and accepting the whole of yourself. It's like there's no way around that. You can't get around that, and it's not easy for anybody. It's probably not any easier for anybody or any harder for anybody, right? Because it's just one of those challenging parts of human life. But would you say that the yoga practice, the practice of getting on the mat, has helped you in regards to accepting, not just because you're obviously very good at the postures, but not just the parts that are shiny and happy, but the parts that are more challenged and more shy and more, all those parts of our being that we struggle with?
Yeah, I think inevitably, if you do any kind of self-inquiry, whether it be with movement and the way your body can move or not move, whether you do it in the mind, any type of self-inquiry is always going to, if it's good self-inquiry, help you embrace that kind of embarrassed part of yourself, that insecure part of yourself. And by embracing it, I think that we really can become whole again and then experience that, I do have unmet desires, I do have frustrations, I do have angers, I do become disgusted by things, but I also have courage. I also have all of these positive emotions like, inspiration and creativity, and these things are available to me. And if I try not to just polarize myself and decide that I always want to be happy, then I can live a much fuller and more meaningful life because I'm not always fighting against the dark and trying to stick in the light. I can navigate the dark, and when I feel crappy, I can do poses that go along with that mood, or I can do breathing practices or self-inquiry that goes along with that mood, rather than trying to hide from it or entertain myself or distract myself. Using the asana practice, but also using the other limbs of yoga to sort of go into exactly what am I experiencing now, and am I hiding from it? Because if I'm not, then I experience the totality, and even if it doesn't feel great, it feels sweeter when I know that I'm total, and I don't have that kind of pullback or fragmentation of, oh, but this part of me, or oh, that memory, or oh, that experience that I had means that I am such and such. And in reality, everything that has been done is over, and the only thing that persists is this particular experience that we're having now.
I've heard, sometimes terms like moksha and liberation are viewed as a kind of getting away from life. But I've also heard teachers say the only way out is through, right. And it seems like that's kind of what you're saying there.
Yeah, and I think that to bring it back to the difference between modern yoga and ancient yoga is that detachment is sort of the translation that a lot of modern yogis have used for something that I really think actually means deeper participation. Yeah. And it's like you don't detach from something really, you actually have to participate in it more deeply in order for it to be not disturbing your mind. you can't really pull away from anything, because in reality you're connected to everything that your mind can perceive. So if you pull away from anything, it's in a sense of pulling away from the source of life and creativity.
It's always seemed to me that they're one and the same. I think of, somebody, a basketball star or something. They're there in the court. From one angle, you can say that they're fully engaged with what's going on and their whole being is into it. From another angle, they're completely detached and free. And that detachment allows them to respond to the moment. Because, you think about on the basketball court, the moment changes very quickly. And a completely what's happening in this second, give it another second and a half, you can be all the way at the end of the other court, and a whole different scenario is there.
And I think that what we enjoy about sports in general is that we're getting to watch people who are experiencing time in a totally different way than we normally mundanely experience time.
Right.
And so there's like what they call being in the zone, or you have this sort of moment where everything is so much is happening, but you've got your attention on so many details and so many little nuances of movement and internal experience and angles and lines that the brain is accompanying and accounting for, that in a sense time slows down for that person as the ball's in the air. Many calculations are going on, and much faster than if it's not a life or death game, winning or losing situation. We just allow ourselves to work on a much lower and slower sort of level.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the things that yoga and qigong and different kinds of movement practices can help us to do is to unlock that potential of that sort of sports in the zone state, and practice that as a thing that we do for ourselves, not just to win or lose a game, but to experience the quality and the texture of what's actually in front of us, and internally, but also externally. I think that's what mindfulness really is kind of being able to step out of that mundane context and experience time differently, but also to be wildly participating, like you said,
Yeah.
and also free from the distraction of other external things.
That's right, yeah, free from the distraction. So that's interesting. The detachment is from the distracting elements. So you can kind of lean into the marrow of the
Of what's
moment
actually there.
and really go get to the bottom of it. One last question. This is what I ended with your sister. That one of the Sanskrit words that has survived from ancient times till now, a lot of people begin or end their yoga class with, and that's the term namaste. What is that? What does that word mean to you? What's the spiritual significance of that word?
Well, I mean, the word nama means sort of to name. And so I think that, the full definition is something like the light in me recognizes, honors the divine light in you. And so I think that in a way, namaste is a way of saying we're going to call out that light and recognize it together. And so in calling out the light and recognizing it together, we participate in it. And it's not that we're ignoring the dark or we're ignoring the not divine parts of ourselves, because if you think of it from a tantric perspective, everything's divine, even the horrible things.
Yeah.
So in a sense, namaste, nama, to name or to sort of hail that energy and recognize it, gives it power.
So it's like, would you say that when the masks are put away, then the light part of ourselves, the dark part of ourselves, none of that really matters. There's a unity between people that can embrace that is somehow deeper than the things that would divide us and cut us off from one another. And that yoga, I would say probably every spiritual path is about meeting each other, these other beings that we're walking around the planet with that kind of care, quality, concern, openness, honesty, those kinds of things.
For sure, and I think that, one of the things is missing in modern yoga in general is this whole idea of the yama and the niyama, which is the first limb of yoga, and in some people's mind, the first thing that, in a sense, we should try to practice before we even do the movements or the breathing or the meditational parts. And the idea, I think, behind these kind of moral and ethical obligations or vows, as it's sometimes translated, the idea is that if you practice self-study and cleanliness and purity and devotion and all these kinds of things, that that by doing so you will create less karma and be more free to experience that sort of light that we're trying to call out. And first it takes a strong intention, and then it takes a lot of wandering sort of in the dark and finding a teacher, and then hopefully overcoming and going beyond what that teacher can show you, and then finding another teacher. And so I think that yoga really, and all spiritual practices, require that we have a lifelong study, and we be very interested if we want to really connect on that level, rather than just saying, oh well, the Bible told me. So.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That was long. Time goes by quick.